Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that can shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 44-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Kathy, 52-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum. And change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present.
Hi Laura, how are you going?
Hey Kathy, I'm well. How are you going?
Not too bad. Laura, guess what? We've got an amazing guest on today. We've got a registered psychologist bringing us some expert advice on change.
Well, that is what I need, Kathy. I need some expert advice, and I'm super pumped to find out what Tracey has to say and advise me on how to deal better with change, because I think I could do with the advice.
Tracey is a registered clinical psychologist. She specialises in working with mostly adults who have been through life-changing events, including illness, workplace injuries, chronic pain, chronic health, and everything in between.
Hi, Tracey. Welcome to The Change.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Lovely to have you. When we think about change and hear phrases like a change is as good as a holiday, we're often led to believe that change is good. But in your experience, when can change feel hard or challenging? We would love some examples.
Yeah, sure. Look, yeah, change is great when it's a holiday. Unfortunately, that's not usually why I see people. Yeah, look, I think one of the major reasons that it's hard and that it's difficult is when it's taking us right outside of our comfort zone, when when it's just not what we planned or were, looking forward to, for example. So it could also be something that triggers memories of previous experience of change. So that is another factor that plays in. But I think one of the main things is if it's not instigated by us, if it's outside of our control. So some examples of that: workplace change. It's a big one,
Mm,
and that could be loss of job. It could be, change of boss. It could be change of work team. It could be all sorts of, workplace changes. It could be a workplace injury, which is something that I work with a lot. Relationship changes, of course, things like
mm,
divorce, or death of a spouse, that type of thing. Natural disasters, certainly something that are right outside of our control. Financial pressures to, we don't plan to be under pressure financially, but it really does happen quite a lot. Like I mentioned before, loss, and that could be the death of someone very close to us, or it could be a loss of something else like our work role, a loss of our identity in terms of our parenting roles. It could be anything like that.
mm.
And of course, health. It's a major change if you have a health event. And so there's all sorts of things tied up with that as well that make change very, very difficult.
Mm.
Um, and we're often being told we have to change when there's been a major health event. It really feels outside of our control. Yeah.
It's interesting what you say there, because a lot of those things, grief, relationships, health, they all hit in midlife. And I think that it is that time of life where change suddenly comes upon us in such major ways. And
Absolutely.
do you think that it is an age-related thing? And does change get harder with age?
I think that's a really good question because I think, there's multiple sort of answers to that. I thought about that, whole thing around, with age comes wisdom, and I think that's quite true. I think that, by as we're aging, and certainly more so as we become, into those more twilight years, if you like. We've learnt to deal with lots of changes by this stage. I think that midlife area of change can be so multifaceted with lots of things changing. And not only sort of if you're a parent and you've got children growing and all of that sort of thing and becoming adults themselves, but also you have aging parents who suddenly put a different demand on your life as well. So lots and lots of different reasons where age can be a factor and not necessarily a negative. It
Mm,
could well be a positive that we've learned a lot and we've got ways of dealing and coping that we might not have had when we were teenagers, for example. It does depend on our life experience, I guess, as well in that regard. Um, but yeah, it's difficult when we perceive a lack of sort of control in that
mm,
change process as well. So I think it depends on how much we feel a sense of control over what's happening, and you know, conversely, that sort of lack of control, that
yeah.
someone else is pressing the buttons. Mm,
I guess, like, around those parenting moments,
yeah.
if we think of those parenting moments, as much as we prepare ourselves, we know we're growing our children and preparing them to send them away to fly and go off, but sometimes they do things, or that change is foisted upon us quicker than we imagine.
Mm.
Would that be correct in sort of saying that?
Yeah, I mean, because as they're becoming adults, they're starting to, you know, write their own story, so to speak, aren't
Mm,
they? And they aren't going to behave as children anymore
Yeah,
because they're emerging adults. And I don't know. I think we prepare ourselves for it. We know it's going to happen. I think for most of us, it still comes as a bit of a shock. It's like, okay, I'm not ready for this. I don't want to deal with this right now. And again, because it's outside of our control, it's in their control.
yeah.
And it's interesting how we react to that. We have always have choices around that.
mm,
Sure. Have you noticed that, I guess, over the last few years with the pandemic,
Mm.
and I'm just kind of throwing this one at you, has that kind of, with parenting changes and those midlife changes, have they been harder for people, I guess, because this is an experience that none of us have navigated before?
It's been unique. um,
unprecedented.
yeah. Oh, yes. There's a word. If
Wasn't
I
it
never,
word of the year or something?
oh, I don't care if I never hear it again. But
That's
anyway,
right.
look, yes, I think we can't discount that very abnormal situation. But I think it's still possible to sort of look at normal reactions in an abnormal situation, and the fact that it was hard for all of us in our own ways. We're all dealt with it differently as we do as individuals, but collectively, there was this change in just about everything we did. And
Mm,
how we thought had to change. Everything had to change. And all of a sudden, collectively, we sort of were forced into an environment that we had very little control over. Massive, massive change. And I think the impact on families, probably quite varied. Some struggled more than others. Some learnt things from it. Some found new ways of behaving as a family. And some people found it quite useful, particularly the work from home brigade. The use of this type of technology
mhm,
has opened up all sorts of possibilities as well for dealing with things differently. And honestly, change is all about learning to cope with things differently.
mm. So
Mm,
change can be good, right? It can be a
Oh,
a
absolutely.
positive force. Sometimes it can
Mm,
feel
yeah.
hard, but it can be
Mm,
good too.
yeah. I liken it very much. I mean, it is a form of stress, let's face it.
Mm,
And stress is like that. Stress sort of gets a bad rap, it's a bad thing. But if you think about it, stress shows up in all aspects of life. Weddings, getting married, those sorts of really positive things in our life, still really, really stressful.
yeah.
And can see all sorts of behavioral responses
mhm.
to that stress.
Mm,
But it's overall a very positive experience. Having a baby also largely a very positive experience, but incredibly stressful in terms of the amount of change that happens at that time in our lives. So the two things are quite connected.
Mm. Is there do you think there's certain people cope better with change than others? Is there a personality type or star
Oh,
sign? I don't know. That
now if
cope
I
better
had
with change?
the answer to that, I think broadly speaking, if we're able to have good psychological flexibility, if we're able to, as I just said, look at things and see, can I do this differently? Is there a way for me to be flexible about what's happening for me, and but what are my choices here? If we can do that, then we manage change and stress quite well. Someone once said to me, and I'm sure this was you know uh, in a paper somewhere, but honestly I can't remember, that people who do well with stress meet it as a type of challenge.
Mm,
And I think we can say that's the same thing about change as well. Yeah. Yeah. So no, I can't narrow it down to a star sign, sorry.
damn it.
I
I was
know.
hopeful there for a moment. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I was thinking of that. Isn't there that sentence where you sort of say, rather than I have to, you say I get to do,
Mm.
I get to do this, I get to parent, I get to go to this work today or something instead of I have to kind of just psychologically make it seem like a better
Yes.
thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the language we use really does make a difference.
Mm,
I was discussing this with somebody just the other day. They said, "Well, what I say to myself, does it really matter?" And
mm,
yes, it does. And when you look at things like the word "but," I'd go to the party, but I'm feeling really tired and I'm not going to enjoy myself, blah, blah, blah. I'm really tired and I'm going to go to the party. I could enjoy myself, you know,
mm,
and it's switching that word around, changing it up a little bit.
mm.
It can really make a difference to the way we feel about something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
super simple, really, but it
It
is
is.
just the
Yeah.
way, yeah, we talk to ourselves and
Yeah.
no, I like
Particularly the
that.
way we talk to ourselves. I
Mm,
mean, generally speaking, one of the things that I often will throw at my clients is what you just said about yourself. Would you say that about anybody in your life to them? You
mm,
know, N- 99.999 times out of 100, no way would they talk to anybody else the way they talk to themselves.
mm. It's
And
so true.
yeah, it really is one to think about.
So I was thinking about some of the lesser known changes. We've talked a
Mm.
little about health and divorce and some, and kids growing up. Yeah, what are some of the lesser known changes that you have had to help your clients deal with?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, I recently left a job and I found that change much harder than I had imagined, kind of adapting from being employed to being suddenly unemployed and leaving a job that I thought was going to be my kind of forever home job to no longer. And yeah, I just wondered if you had other examples where your clients have dealt with sort of similar
Mm.
issues. Mm,
The work one is a really good one because I mean I work a lot with injured workers, with people who have had workplace injuries or
mm,
people who have had motor vehicle accidents and things like that. Um, so their life is thrown up in the air and
mm,
changed enormously. And a lot of what is going on there is this, again, grief and loss, if you like, because we tend to, all of us do this, we tend to sort of wrap our identities around what we do.
mm,
And because we do that, when that changes or when we can't do our work anymore, the thing that we love to do or the thing that we are just so familiar with, because sometimes we don't love our work. Yet when we have to change it, we still have this reaction to it. We don't
yeah.
want to, um, because we wrap our identity around it, and we feel this loss of self when we have to make that change. And it's interesting because you know really the that is you, it's always you've always been there. It
Mm.
doesn't change. that integral part of you, who you are, is there regardless of what's happening around you. However, we feel like we've lost something of ourselves, and often that happens a lot when you've had an injury and you physically can't do that job anymore. Again, it's something that's taken out of your control. It's not your fault. You haven't instigated it. You haven't made a decision to do it. You know, places, redundancies, things like that, where these are forced upon you outside of your control. That's why it's so hard. But also that sense of self that's so entwined with what we do, particularly if we've been in the workforce for a long time.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting you say that because it's sort of like this sense of grief, and it's a bit like what you said, Kathy, about when your kids go into the next phase, you're kind of, even though it's a change, it is also grief for what you've kind
Mm,
of lost and left behind, or
yes.
when you have to start parenting your own parents, it's the
Yeah,
same
Yeah,
sort of thing, isn't it? It's like this
definitely.
loss,
absolutely.
yeah, of what
Yeah,
was.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm,
And you like if I think about the change from being a participant parent,
mm,
if that's if you could describe it like that, but really being there in those, and I know it's really hard for young parents with little babies. That's so overwhelming. That's really physical parenting, and it's full on, and it never ends. And then they move into this next stage where they're teenagers, and it's less of the physical and far more of the emotional. And then all of a sudden, you become like, I kind of call it the otherhood. You know, I'm no longer the mother. I
mm,
mean, I'm always their mother, of course I am, but I'm no longer participating in their life
mm,
in the same way as I once was. And I'm kind of in relegated to the sidelines, and I'm not the first person that they call if something happens. I'm not necessarily, and it's a big change, and it can be really challenging to kind of get my head around that sometimes. And it's not that I'm unloved, it's not that they don't care for me. It's it's exactly what is meant to happen. It's
mm,
exactly the way life is meant to be. Um, but it can be hard. It can be really, really hard because
mm,
I want nothing more than to have those little moments again where they're curled up on my lap and
mm,
giving them big hugs.
Mm,
But and you can still have those moments, just
mm,
in different ways. But
mm,
you've really kind of got to think about, how do I change those things? Though change is my kryptonite. Like,
mm,
it's, change is not something that I do easily, and
mm,
it's not something that I've ever done well. I think it's very much a learned skill for me. And most of the time I'm rocking in the corner in a fetal position crying about change. So even when it's changed that it's something that I've instigated.
mm.
yep.
So yeah.
It's common, Kathy, I think, and I think, yep,
Yes.
yeah, Tracy's nodding, yes. We find change hard, it's a definite thing.
It really is. And and I think that that major transition from parenting children to parenting adult children is such a tough one, because it's there's no rule book for it, and it's interesting. Kathy just talked about not doing it well or not doing it right or whatever it is in terms of how you manage change, and I don't know that there's anybody there with a scorecard actually, saying, "Yep, you've done well there, big tick." You know,
Mm,
um, we do the best we can with what we have, and that's sort of across the board. And we all have this little thing that we do sometimes with hindsight, and like to beat ourselves up a little bit about, "Oh, I could have done that better," but could you? You did the best you can at that point in time, and yeah, have you learned something from it? Absolutely, because that's the beauty of being a human being, is everything we do is we learn something from it. And as long as we're willing for that to be, as long as we're
Yeah.
open to it,
mm,
then we haven't failed at anything. We've learnt from it. We're going to, you know, next time we're going to do something differently. Perhaps in this moment we've got control right now to choose to do something that we can do. You know,
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
And so I guess you've already spoken about the way that we talk to ourselves is super important. And,
yes.
Kathy said she's coping with change by rocking in the corner crying. I mean, that's one way.
It is one way, absolutely,
We all do it at
absolutely.
times. Do you
Yes.
have what are the best ways to approach change in your professional opinion? How do we help ourselves and our friends
Mm,
guard against, finding those changes hard?
yeah, yeah. And and I think whilst there's not a one size fits all,
Mm. No.
again, can't give you one of those. Um, I think recognizing that we have choices is really useful. Recognizing that, yeah, in all situations, in all difficult situations, we just got two or three choices. We just might not like some of them, and some of them may not be practical. We can always leave or run away or avoid. It's a coping strategy of sorts. It's usually not entirely useful in the long term. Sometimes in the short term, it is. Sometimes if we're in a really bad situation, leaving is what we need to do. We can also stay and live life according to our values and do what we can to improve the situation that we're in. And the key to that is do what we can. We're very, very good, all of us, on focusing on what we can't do. Generally speaking, when you focus on what you can't do, you're not very happy. You're just stuck.
Mm.
Start moving into thinking about, well, what are the things that I can do? What small thing can I do today to help me manage this change? And it could be, I'm going to get up and get dressed today. You know, it's
Mm.
it's those small things that, we start to build that resilience back. Because I think it gets a bit of a shake when we're going through change. Brick by brick, we can build that back in by making choices about what we do, about choosing to do what we can rather than focusing on what we can't do. So these are really important sort of broad speaking ways of dealing with change, but it's really hard to sort of narrow it down unless we're dealing with something specific. Of course, we have the choice of staying put, not doing anything,
Mm.
um, you
Yep.
know, you know, um, and sort of not making a difference to anything, and sometimes making it worse. That really isn't going to be the best choice that we can make. So focusing on the can do's is really important. Maybe approaching things as a bit of a challenge. Bring it on. Let's see what we can do here.
Mm.
you know, let's sort of give ourselves a chance to build that resilience back. Brick by brick, focusing on what I can do. The other thing too that I think especially, is especially important is we don't have to do it on our own.
Mm.
Who in our lives can we reach out to? You know, Ideally, reaching out to those people who we know are supportive, those people who will be on our team, be our coach, do the rah rah from the sidelines. That sort of stuff is really helpful, and often we need that communication. Massively important. If we're instigating change on others, we need to communicate.
Mm.
And I guess I'm, talking about workplaces and things like that here.
Mm.
you know, um, and we can communicate too. If something's not going well for us, we need to let people know that we need help.
Mm.
You know, and often we tend to try and soldier through these things on our own, and it's not always possible. Or
Mm.
you know, or we get there, but we're pretty shattered at the end of it, or we are, like Kathy says, rocking in a corner somewhere crying. That you know, it's a strategy and it's a really good thing to do, but you know, I think that's probably in a broad way one of the ways that we're best able to deal is doing what we can, reaching out,
Mm.
not being an island in this change, you know?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's community, it's communication,
Yes.
and it's also having that focusing on what we can do, what we can control.
Yes.
And, it's, I guess, as part of that, looking after ourselves,
Definitely.
in whatever shape or form that is,
Yes.
whether it's going for a walk, meditation, seeking professional help, etc. It's lots of that
Yes. And
along the
watching
way.
what we say to ourselves,
Yeah.
that again, that
Mm,
language that we use towards ourselves. What would I tell my best friend in this situation?
mm,
How about I tell myself that?
Mhm.
And see what happens. I mean,
yeah.
it's life's a bit of an experiment, isn't it? Let's see, let's see what happens. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can kind of flip the script and find light in even the darkest or most difficult of changes? I'm thinking about the big ones: grief,
Oh,
divorce.
yes.
How do we cope in those kinds of
Mm.
situations which are so incredibly difficult, such big changes?
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good example. I think one of the things that we have this sort of sense that we need to be happy all the time. You
Mm,
know, that we should be able to, brush this off and soldier on sort of thing. And we tend to avoid allowing emotions and feelings to just be. And when I'm working with clients who are grieving, um, it's almost like giving them permission to have those emotions, to cry if they want to to just sit and be sad
mm,
because it's normal. It's okay. We don't have to be completely under control of all of those emotions all of the time. We are allowed to be sad when something sad has happened. you know, so in some ways, I guess what I'm saying is it's okay to have these emotions and it's okay to sit with them. However, we don't have to express our feelings to people either. Sometimes people say, "Oh, you need to go and talk to someone." Not necessarily. Um, Try it and see. You know,
mm,
try it and see. If you're not sure whether it's going to be helpful, try it and see.
yeah.
And I'll have, I over the years I'll have clients who will say to me, I have never talked about this stuff to anybody,
Wow.
you know, and and they will express some surprise and satisfaction that it's been helpful for them. Not everybody. Some people will say, yeah, this isn't for me. And
Mm,
that's perfectly fine. You know, again, we're all individuals. We're all going to have a different sense of what's useful for us. But I can't emphasize enough that need to have self-compassion and to care for yourself.
mm,
Um, I think we're all a little bit deficient in that area. We
yeah.
we're if we're parents, we're just so far down the pecking order. We're doing everything for everyone else. And that then tends to flow right across workplaces, everything else. We're busy looking after everyone else, and we forget about ourselves. So that flip it word's really nice. What would you do for someone else in this situation?
Mm,
How about you do that for you?
mm,
It's a good way to go. It's a good I like that term, flip it.
yeah.
Flip it around.
Flip it around. No,
Yeah,
that's so true. You just have to put yourself sometimes at the center and say, well, yeah, what do I need?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. What do I need for me right now?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and that then, gives you a bit of permission to feel whatever you feel, to express it if you need to.
Mm,
I feel like in these, I don't know, um, times of social media and Instagram and all of those things, that we all kind of have to have the appearance of having it all together. When in actual fact, 90% of people, 99% of people, most people don't have it all together.
Yeah.
And we see the highlight reel,
mm,
but people think that that's the full-time reel
Mm.
as opposed to the highlight reel, and then we don't give ourselves permission to, it's like, oh, but I saw that person and they really coped with the death of their parent or whatever, really, really well. Why am I not coping like that? Well, because you're different. As you said, Tracy, you're an individual. We're all individuals, and
That's right.
we do that change differently. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And we don't live in the highlight reel.
Mm.
No.
Unfortunately. I mean, life,
Yes, unfortunately.
yeah, but life would be a little dull if we did, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
So I
there's
hope
2
that gave you a bit of an answer to that. Yeah.
It really did. And I think too, there's a lot of guilt around not coping, like what you said,
Mm,
about social media, and we're all looking at each other, going, "Oh, she's doing so much better with change," or "Oh, and yeah, there's this. Then there's another layer of guilt on
mm,
top of our already,
yeah, yeah.
fragile feelings around change and the grief and the loss and all the
Mm.
things that we're trying to deal with. So I think, yeah, it's just multi-layered.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could probably be here for hours and hours,
Yes. Yeah.
peeling those onion layers off. This world that we live in, just, you sort of think about, I've been around for a little while now, and you think about the massive changes
Mm.
that are there, just us doing this today with this technology that we have, 20 years ago wasn't even,
Wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
it wasn't a thing, and it is
No.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from a society point of view, we probably haven't sort of kept pace with the implications of this stuff.
Mm.
And like Kathy was talking about, the social media and what we see, and we have this thing that we do as humans where we like to compare ourselves to others, and generally in a very unfavorable way.
Yeah.
It's not often that we'll compare ourselves to someone and go, oh, I'm so much better than that.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
no.
did, we wouldn't have a problem. But we don't.
Yeah.
We look at others, and we never measure up, because again, like that highlight reel thing,
Mm.
what we're comparing ourselves to is not the full picture. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's a really important one to remember, I think, when we start doing the other thing that we all tend to do, which is judge ourselves. Yeah.
Yes. Massive
Mm.
imposter syndrome, and then we're
Oh,
not being kind to ourselves, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And we even start judging ourselves on the things that are supposed to be helping us. It's
Mm.
like, cut yourself a break. It's
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for a walk, breathe the fresh air, take a mindful moment,
Yes. And then when you're like,
just,
"But I haven't walked enough because my step count's too low," or
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it can get
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's interesting, people think they're being mindful, and they go for a walk, but they're counting their steps. They're
Mm.
judging themselves. And one of the big things about mindfulness is being,
Mm.
not judging yourself.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting. Letting go of judgment is an incredibly difficult thing, I think, for most of us.
Mm.
Yeah.
But and yet so helpful if we could do it. So it's something we all need to
Absolutely.
focus on, it sounds like.
Definitely. If we can chuck a bit of non-judgment into
Yes.
our change management process, that would
Yep.
be very, very helpful.
Yes, into
Yeah.
our toolkit, bit of
Yes.
self-kindness. Yeah, yeah.
All of
Um,
those things. Yeah.
Tracy, well, thank you. I think we've got one last question for you. We like to ask all our guests, as this
Mhm.
podcast is called The Change. We're
Yes.
talking a lot about midlife women. What is your relationship like with the change?
Yes. Well, I'm probably one of those really, really fortunate people who are out the other side, in a sense, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of dealing with those hot flushes, and temperament changes and all of those things that go on. And I probably, when I look at how other people have had to deal, have been quite lucky. So, and I think it's good to talk about a positive experience. I think it's
Yeah.
important to know that it can be there. I sort of don't mind sharing that. For me, it was okay. I mean, there were certainly moments of fairly disgusting unpleasantness, around it. However, I think, to me, it sort of represented, okay, I'm starting another phase of my
Mm.
life here. actually practicing what I preach, embracing the fact that, hey, I'm starting something new here. This is great,
Mm,
and I didn't see it as something that was taking anything away from me, but I am very much aware that for some people it really is. Some people really grieve the loss of being able to reproduce and things like that as well. There's lots of layers around the change, if you like. It can certainly be a very difficult time for a lot of women. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot more research in that area now too, and there's a lot more recognition in workplaces. I think they've got a long way to go, but they're starting to notice and starting to be aware that women are at that point in their lives are going to be having problems, possibly. Not
mm,
everyone, but some people will have quite significant problems. And again, that impact on their career path and everything else is quite catastrophic sometimes, to be honest.
mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm so glad that you personally had a good experience because, as you say, we do need to talk. It's a bit like birth stories, like
Yes,
they can't
yes.
all be bad, can they? It's good to have a good
Yes,
one.
absolutely. And sort of for someone about to embark on that birth process, they really need to hear that too,
That's
don't
right.
they?
So,
Yeah, it's a
yes.
scary time. And I think, again, something that I didn't mention, I guess, with change is when there's a factor of unknown and
Mm,
uncertainty, then the stress levels go up. So anything that reassures us is very, very useful.
yeah.
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 Understanding. Yeah. And probably a little less Dr. Googling and a little more speaking to health professionals
Yeah.
in that regard.
I love that. Tracy, thank you so much for your time and for coming on the change. Well, I thought she was so interesting at what she had to say around dealing with change. The thing that struck me, I think, most was thinking about change, even when it's a lesser change, like, leaving a job, as a sense of grief and loss, and then how that affects us because I hadn't really considered, leaving my job as a sort of grieving process, but I thought that that was really interesting to me. And I think that I'm glad you kind of said that because it helped me deal with my feelings around some of the lesser changes, thinking of them as a sort of grief, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure Tracy also mentioned giving ourselves permission
Mm,
to feel those feelings,
yeah.
which is so important because I know I can be really guilty of thinking, but I brought this upon myself. Like, I know when we moved house, it was something that I really wanted to do. It was a change. It was a huge change,
Yeah,
moving house, of
it
course,
is.
big change.
Mm,
However, it was something that I wanted. And I still really, really struggled with that. And so hearing Tracy say to give ourselves permission to feel those feelings, I thought that was really important as well. And my other big takeaway was thinking about the things I can do,
mm,
the things, even if they're just tiny little things in each day, rather than focusing on the things that I can't do,
yeah.
because I can focus on the things that I can't do till the cows come home. Change is absolutely my kryptonite. There is always one small little thing that I can do every day that I can control, even in a whirlwind of change. I don't know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the focus on what we can do for ourselves, looking after ourselves, I thought that was really interesting, and as well about what she said about self-talk and being kind. I
Yeah.
think that's such a simple thing when you hear it said, but it's something that we need to be reminded of again and again. And yeah, it's interesting what you say about moving house. That is a big change, I think. And I think that people, we do it's a positive, but it also is a difficult one. And I think that's the thing about change, isn't it? Sometimes, and like Tracy said, birth, marriage, moving house, or starting or ending a job, they can be great and exciting, but they can also be challenging. So I think it's good to, have a sense of understanding of that and acceptance. And yeah, change is hard, but we can, with that kindness and focusing on the can do, it can be okay.
And really just being kind to ourselves. I was excited to hear that Tracey said that, like in general, the change was a pretty positive experience for her. So, that's really exciting for anyone who hasn't been through it or is kind of there to know that it's not all doom and gloom as well.
100%. And it was so funny because just before we introduced Tracey, I couldn't get my aircon working and I was having some kind of hot flush. And I said to you, oh my gosh, I'm having my first hot flush. I think it might just be because it's hot in here, but I am, at 44, sort of getting that little early stages of perimenopause. And so I'm obsessed with listening to other people's experiences because I'm on the cusp. And I'm so, like you, happy to hear that it's not all bad for everyone. I'm going to cling to that very hard.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, she was a great guest. It was lovely to talk to Tracey. I was very thrilled we could get her on for her expert advice.
And, who knows, down the track we might have another change topic that we'd really like to get Tracey's expert opinion on. We might bring her back. Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.